Okay, I have been, to my own surprise, just absolutely consumed in thought by this Columbus logo and name change over the past few days, basically since I heard about it. It has been fascinating to me. Every little detail has been fascinating to me. I'm mostly an outside, I guess, objective party to this. I don't really have a dog in this fight or in this situation, but every little thing that has happened with this has had me just on the edge of my seat. It's been really interesting, and I wrote a surprising amount about it. I think I'm just going to read this. I don't know what I'm going to do, like with video. I'll put like FIFA 2000 or something, and I guess I'll start now. I don't know how to get into it. The crest is bad. The biggest problem with this change, from my perspective as a relative outsider, is that this is just a terrible new crest, and I keep finding new ways in which I find it bad as time progresses. In my eyes, this looks like a placeholder. This looks like what the KC and WSL team has. This looks like what the Washington football team of the National Football League has. It's got one vaguely regional concept in there with this flag outline, and there's a big C because it's Columbus, and that's the first initial of the city. This looks like it was created with the understanding that it would be changed later. Even seeing this on apparel, it looks a bit like an afterthought, like a mock-up almost. And on top of this, within your own state, I can count 2 baseball teams, a basketball team, and a hockey team, all in the major leagues of each, one of which is in the same city as the Crew, whose logo is also a big C, and none of those look as awkward and arguably like a G as this C does. To my eyes, this looks like a good enough for now thing, not something worth throwing out what, at least in my eyes, was a very good crest to install. I know I have the beholder and all, but I just don't see who was so confident about this crest in particular that they'd throw out what they had, especially as more information has come out recently that shows there was knowledge beforehand that established supporters were not supportive of this and would feel scorned. They knew that coming in, and they still stuck with this. I'm very surprised by that. Well, maybe not surprised by that, but I find that very interesting. Most people are rightfully focusing on the dropping of the Crew name officially from the name of the club, but it has been very interesting to me in the past few days to see something happening that really reflects how poor this name change is, which is that now media people are going to have to verbally say the name of this team. In text, this looks boring and generic, sure, but in speech, Columbus SC, it sounds unnatural, it sounds awkward, and downright cacophonous. You've got this bunching of S sounds near the end of the moniker. You have an S leading into an eh, and then back into an S, and another S, which can be very awkward to get out, especially in quick conversation. And I think especially in like fast-moving conversational speech, like say, play-by-play commentary during a soccer match, this is gonna sound really bad, trying to say Columbus SC so many times fast. It's awkward. I don't think that the fact that this sounds awkward is gonna stop anybody from supporting the team, obviously, but it is such a base level thing. It's so much at the concrete of this whole thing that saying the name of this team is awkward and it sounds bad. Did nobody go out and look into a bathroom mirror and just repeat this to themselves? That's like a fairly standard practice when you're rebranding, is what's it going to sound like when I say it out loud with my mouth? And it just feels like people didn't do that, and people are going to find out about that as they have to keep announcing matches and they have to keep stumbling over what is just a very awkward name. And I haven't seen a lot of people talk about that. I heard on the radio yesterday, I was listening to the Sirius XM United States of Soccer show, and I did hear the host, Jason Davis, trying to get through, and he's just like, yeah, that is awkward to say, Columbus SC. So I am interested to see how people deal with that going forward. Regardless, dropping the crew name also seems like a really obvious mistake. I'll get more into this later. Probably best evidenced by the incessant, dubious insistence by the front office that they were not really dropping the crew name, despite officially really dropping the crew name. This is a problem anytime that you drop a name that is important to people, especially a sports team name. This happens every time that something like that is dropped. Even in the kind of pre-2.0 MLS era with the Dallas Burn and the Kansas City Wizards, there were complaints. There was a lot of complaints. There was physical protesting with the Impact name last year. But the crew name, I think, had really resonated with Columbus's supporters because of what the fan base had gone through in the late 2010s with the whole saving of the crew and the ups and downs, the losing in the Cup final in 15, and this whole kind of story with it. People had really grown attached to it. Crew is a very evocative name, too. It implies togetherness, implies community. There is definitely a certain working class ethos to it. I mean, you remember those original logos had the three guys in the hard hats, so there's almost this like symbolism here too of these rich owners trying to drop this name that had this sort of ethos against the wishes of the supporters, who were obviously less wealthy than the people who own the club. I will also say that though it was clearly like a 1996 name at the beginning, it did, at least in my eyes, it developed into a much more natural sounding kind of football name compared to other names from the original 96 franchises like Galaxy, like obviously like Wiz and Clash and Burn, that sort of stuff. I don't feel like it feels that different, especially after 25 years of it, of other common tags that like Anglophone teams have, names like Rangers or Rovers. It doesn't, like, Crew doesn't feel that out of place compared to, Burn. I sort of feel the same thing about this inevitable New England rebrand that's going to happen in a few years, whenever, or potentially never, or potentially in just a couple of years whenever they get their new stadium. It's going to be bad form, I feel, for them to completely drop Revs, which developed pretty much organically as a nickname for the team. Compare that to like Hibs for Hibernian, or even Wolves for Wolverhampton Wanderers in England. I feel like that developed organically. You don't need to throw that out. Like, that's something you should want, because the search is always for something like Euro sounding or something authentic sounding. And I just think that's such a bizarre decision, is always to throw away the actual authenticity that's been developed in favor of something that sounds maybe authentic. I get wanting to sound European. That's where the best soccer is played. But when you look at the way that the beloved names of those clubs developed, it's not that different from the way that a unique, if strange, name eventually became commonplace over time and appreciated for it. I tried many metaphors for this, so I'm just going to throw them all out here. It is the difference between a person learning a handshake to be a show of mutual respect and naturally using it to introduce themselves with other people over the years of practice, and a dog learning the handshake as an imitation of a physical motion that nets them a milk bone. It is the difference between early word processors using the floppy diskette as an icon for saving data, because that's what you used to do to save data, and current word processors using the floppy diskette as an icon for saving data because that icon is supposed to mean save data. It is the difference between wearing camouflage clothing because you're in the military and you need to be camouflaged from people attacking you, and wearing camouflage clothing because people in the military wear it and you think people in the military are cool. In a vacuum, I don't know that either of these are good or bad, but one is definitely more genuine, more authentic, developed out of a unique place than the other. Regardless, it's the difference between something developing the same way in two different places, and it's the difference between something developing in the same fashion in two different places, and one place kind of cosplaying as the other. I think that's the big difference. The first one is clearly more genuine, and I think that's really what they had with this crew name. So the third thing is that the rollout was really bad, both in terms of timing and the way that they did this. I said the Crest was probably the most baffling thing about all of this, but I really think the rollout actually was. I've seen, once again, with this, so many stories about the Kansas City Wizards to Sporting KC turnover of 2010 with regards to this change, with a couple of huge caveats missing. I looked back at the news, like at the Kansas City Star's like rumors page from 2010, and for months, like dating back to August, there were discussions of the Wizards might change to Sporting Club of Kansas City. And it eventually got announced in November of 2010. When the change was announced, it was announced in an event in downtown Kansas City in this big pavilion area, KC Live, where everybody holds their big events. They unveiled the logo. They unveiled the new uniforms. It was a big party. They showed that they signed Omar Bravo. They tried to make a big deal out of it. And this was in November 2010. 4 or 5 months before the next season was going to start. I can remember receiving a Sporting Kansas City shirt as a Christmas gift in December 2010 before they had even played a game with that name. We had months of build-up for it, months to get excited for it, and a new stadium to anticipate. They even played several months of games on the road before the new stadium opened. So it felt almost natural. It was something we were anticipating and looking forward to, was the introduction of this team with this new name, and they were winning games too. That didn't hurt. That big public event and display made the club seem confident in the new direction. They had one of the members of the ownership group, Rob Heineman. He was going out and doing so many interviews in the build-up to the season, explaining the name, talking proudly about the direction that they wanted to go in. Even if you as a fan didn't necessarily believe it or didn't respect it or didn't want it, the team at least looked like they believed it. And this is why the rollout was so strange for this. It was a really bizarre timing. They decided to kind of release this officially on a Sunday afternoon in mid-May, 4 weeks into the season. No public unveiling or anything, just a social media post. Most people learned of it through a leaked JPEG of a store page of a polo. There was one very unconvincing interview with a part owner of the team that garnered but 1,400 views on YouTube at the time of recording today. They treated this name change like the Baltimore Colts treated leaving Baltimore. There was no communication from the main owners for 2 days after the new branding was released, and that one piece of communication was a press release, an apology. That wasn't even sent out like on the official team website. Like a journalist had to screenshot an email and put it out on a Twitter. That was baffling to me. What I get from seeing this is that the people in charge of this change don't believe in it. And if that's the case, then why did they do it? You don't have to rebrand. Nobody's forcing your hand here. You weren't forced by public outcry to change the name, like in DC. They didn't hastily relocate and have like 2 months to get set up for the season like the Kansas City NWSL team did. This smacks of a sense of desperation or even obligation that just isn't necessary. I wouldn't be surprised if this was like nepotistic. That's what this makes me feel like. I used to work in a fitness center at a country club, and this fitness center was run by the son of the country club's owner. And we could not attract any members to come in because this guy, this kid, he was only about 10 years older than I was. He was like early 30s, was just completely incompetent. But despite all of that, his dad, who is now in jail for failing to properly remove asbestos from his properties, kept putting money into this fitness center to keep it running because it was his son's little project, their little thing. That's what this feels like. Everybody can recognize this as bad, but, it's the owner's kids thing, something like that. This may be crude, but this reminds me of the Mr. Show sketch where David Cross plays the kid with intitilitis who's going to theoretically die soon, and the guys at the guitar store have to pretend he's a virtuoso guitar player.
Wait. Whoa, dude, you're incredible!
Like the front office is even trying, they have to convince themselves that this is good despite maybe not really believing it. Like I cannot fathom anybody looking at this and saying like this was worth doing in this way. Why not ride out the season with the name and the logo that you had, have good publicity and good support when they open the new stadium this summer, potentially at full capacity, given the way that the wind seems to be going now? You've got, I think, 4 or 5 teams in the league will be at full capacity next month. They have a good team. They haven't been great at the beginning of this year, but I think they'll pick it up over the summer. And then just announce this during the off season. Do that in November after the season's over. Say, hey, like, this was a great sending off for the crew. Now we're Columbus SC. Like, they could have at least tried that. But doing it at this time, how can you convince yourself that doing it at this time with that logo and that name with so little fanfare through a series of social media posts would end up working for you? It reflects arrogance, it reflects hubris, in a lot of ways it reflects cowardice. To my eyes, the constant, incessant bleating that they're not really dropping the crew name. There was an interview with Pete Edwards where he kept repeating, the C stands for crew. That C on the logo stands for crew. They changed the Twitter handle back to @ColumbusCrew, and the name is now The Crew. They changed all the videos on their YouTube channel to some status where they couldn't be commented upon, like they're marked as like for children now, and YouTube you can't comment on videos that are intended for children. All of this reflects that the front office didn't believe in this, and thus tried to both have this proverbial cake of the rebrand and eat it too, except they also seemed to imply that they didn't want to have the cake nor eat it either. They announced the new logo not with a public event, nor a press conference, nor even a press release. It was like a cross-post Twitter and Instagram video on a Sunday afternoon. The rest of the league even seemed to be caught off guard by this. There were tweets from Toronto FC's social media manager basically stating that he wasn't given anything in preparation for this, like graphics of the new logo, for example, for the game that they had coming up 2 days from them on Wednesday. Last night I watched the TSN broadcast and they didn't even acknowledge the change. To my knowledge, they didn't have access to the new logos. So it was still the old name and the old crest. The players on the team weren't informed of it that much earlier than the public was. From what I heard, it was Sunday, and the public basically found out about it being real on Sunday night and saw the official announcement on Monday. The fallout for this, and this is part 4, is going to be very interesting. Not only should this front office have seen the backlash coming, but I think there is evidence, judging by the YouTube comments thing and the C stands for crew, bleeding, that they did see the backlash coming. There was an article on The Athletic that detailed a meeting with supporter group leaders that showed that they were well warned that a backlash was coming. There was a document leak that was made by a marketing professional who is also apparently very involved with the crew supporter group, the Nordeca, that basically outlined everything that was going to, and in the past week has happened in terms of fan backlash. Former players, and important former players, stated something in disdain for it. Zach Steffen had an Instagram comment that was critical of it. Justin Miram on Twitter was critical as well. Other than them, most of the other big-name crew players, Chad Marshall, Jeff Cunningham, Frankie Haydock, Brian McBride, Edson Buttle, Guillermo Chalotto, just aren't like big-time online posters, which is a good way to be. But the guys who did kind of speak up about it weren't happy about it, it seemed. It seemed like people in the crew periphery, like the crew fandom, kind of the more famous supporters, I guess, they don't have like a lot of celebrity fans. They can't boast A-listers like Sporting KC can. But they were also upset with it. I saw Hanif Abdurraqib. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He's a really good writer from Columbus, very proud of being from Columbus. Seemed disappointed with it. The hosts of a big radio show in Columbus called Common Man and T-Bone, they were critical of the change, apparently. The only other famous crew fans I could find evidence of were the ex-drummer of Flogging Molly and the frontman from Rancid, but they're not big posters either. I will keep an eye on Mark Titus's Twitter page going forward, though.
Cup champs, by the way. It's a great time to be a crew fan.
The media, like the MLS media sphere, which is not that big, but they've not been super supportive either. Oddly enough, the most critically, like outwardly critical person I've seen was Herculez Gomez, who on his show on ESPN Plus, which is really good, called Football Americas, with Sebastian Salazar, was incensed. He called it an insecure attempt to be relevant. In terms of the other most influential people in MLS media, I think that's like Taylor Twellman, who hasn't really said anything one way or another. Alexi Lawless was like weirdly nihilistic, it seemed like, about it. Grant Wall called it straightforwardly a bad rebrand. ESPN's Jeff Carlisle had a very negatively toned article. Jason Davis from SiriusXM had, at least on air yesterday, was pretty critical of it, it seemed. Most of the media people employed by the league itself obviously naturally haven't said anything. And from what I have seen, the general response from local media in Columbus, it seems, is mostly negative as well. The clearest backlash, though, and obviously so, came from the club's fans, and more specifically their most devoted supporters. To start, there was an article that came out in The Athletic detailing a fateful meeting between club brass and a few of the leaders of the Nordeca supporters group, where they were clearly frustrated by it. Apparently a shirt was rended and a tattoo was shown. From what I understand, there were some resignations from supporters with like high up positions in the organization. I've seen many fans online referencing trying to talk to season ticket representatives to get their memberships canceled or get their auto renew canceled if this is to stick. I personally don't like to connect a ton of like real world consequences to the general mood of Twitter and Reddit, but I think the more major thing is that real disdain at the top with your most ardent supporters in the Nordeca. It seems like the sticking points are both the dropping of the crew name because there was so much significant rallying around it back during the Save the Crew era, and mostly, I think, more so than that even, is the way that they seem to get railroaded in the process after having been railroaded so badly by the pre-court era, the we're about to move to Austin era. Those wounds still very fresh in that fan base's mind. In general, in Major League Soccer, the relationship between your real hardcore fans and the club is not like symbiotic, but there is more give and take than in a lot of other big professional leagues. Supporter groups, mostly just out of love for the team and the sport, do fantastic PR for the teams that they care about without much in the way of monetary compensation. Painting those tifos, they take labor. Organizing crowds, that takes labor. Getting new supporters in, that takes effort. A lot of these supporters group do community service. I know the Cauldron does. And just in terms of like selling the team to the community as a whole, and to casual fans as a whole, I mean, into people watching the team on TV, the more active support groups are important to the club's identity. A Major League Soccer match looks so much different than any other American sport. When you turn that on, if you turn on a match during normal times, a match at Providence Park or at Maffrey Stadium, that atmosphere is so much different than anything else. That's one of the reasons why I got so heavy into soccer growing up, was that I was frustrated with this just kind of blasé support in a lot of other leagues. It's not active. It's not that this sort of thing is more fun to me and more fun to watch. And that's something that this league has that other leagues don't. And if you rid yourself of that, you take a huge chunk of why a lot of people like this league. If the Crew's front office has lost the biggest, like most ardent supporters already, before this new stadium has even opened, that doesn't look good for them going forward. They have to consider, what if there are protests at this new stadium? What if this match starts and there's a huge walkout in the 10th minute or something? They've got to deal with that going on, and they probably wouldn't have had to if they had just kept the Crest, at least kept it to the end of the season. The thing that is the most bizarre to me is the idea that this placeholder looking crest and this generic and awkward name was worth severing the link with your most biggest supporters, which apparently was the calculus done. According to the GM, Tim Bezbachenko, there was some statement like, we might lose 7,000 people, gain 15,000 or something like that. I think this may have been a huge mistake on their part. Gaining casual support at the cost of your longtime hardcore supporters will fail you as soon as your team stops winning and as soon as the novelty wears off. And in MLS at this point, you don't have the television deal to make up for that. If you don't have people in the stands, you're losing money. That's what happened last year. They couldn't recover at the way that the National Football League did last year. And that's something that I guess gets missed out on this. I think there's this idea that these new people who are coming to the shiny new stadium are going to be there, all 100% of them, for the long run. And that's just not the case. There are going to be bad years. And you need those people who are there because they care about the team, not just there because they want something fun to do on a Sunday, who are going to be there. And if you lose them, you're also inevitably going to lose the more casual fans. And I just don't see that going well. I don't understand the calculus here. It seems very short-sighted, very short-term. And it didn't have to happen, and it wasn't worth it for what is so clearly just a terrible, terrible logo and a terrible name. It's so bizarre to me.
I don't really know what we learned here today.
No.
So part 5, what did we learn here? I do not know. My theory here is that the idea that this change was made out of obligation is not far from reality. The Haslam family, when they bought the Cleveland Browns, immediately tried to put their stamp on the team with these new uniforms that were really poorly received, and rightfully so. It seems like they're looking to put their stamp on this organization as well. This feels like a lot of boardroom meetings ended up with an amalgamation of different things that worked on paper in the past in different situations. The Wizards changed their name when they opened the new stadium, and that worked for them. People call Minnesota the Loons, so maybe it doesn't have to be in the name of the team. Atlanta has great support, and that crest just has a big letter on it. I don't know what it is. The old crest was also associated with the pre-court era, with the old owners, and I think that might be a big part of it as well, is trying to get away from what was behind that. I think a big part of this, and probably why they're so blind to every issue surrounding it, is that this was a vanity project for the Haslams. And that's worked out for a lot of other owners in the league. I mean, you look at Arthur Blank's public profile. He's more well-respected in this league and in just around sports since taking over Atlanta United, or starting Atlanta United. That has been good for his PR. I think these people want this to be good for them. They want them to be the Haslam's Columbus Soccer Club, and we'll see how that goes, I guess. This is kind of what I'm saying. This is just a part of the fact that Major League Soccer is big business now. If the league's success and future necessitates having such wealthy billionaires' hands all over everything, this is going to be a part of the experience. You don't make the amount of money that the Haslams have without some arrogance, without some hubris, without some cowardice, without fucking a lot of people over, and really without losing an ability to understand the thoughts and desires and feelings of regular people. This is an artifact of that, and it's going to continue to be, artifacts of that will continue to show up in the league going forward, and I guess we're just going to have to see what happens with that. So. Oh, I didn't even mention, the triangle? What the hell is up with that little triangle? Who thought that was a good idea? Just put, what's that even for? They didn't even try to describe that. At least with, the Sporting logo, it's it's shaped like that because it's the old Wiz logo, It's that, we had that. They don't have that for the triangle. What's the deal with the triangle? I'm very confused by the triangle. UMATFP on Twitter. Subscribe for videos on YouTube. So thanks.